I'm your speaker today, and the topic is diversifying demand. First, a little bit about myself. My name is Jean Francois. My mom pronounces it Jean Francois, but I say Jean. I'm from New York. I came to Shipwire about 6 years ago in 2014 to help early adopters, to sell early adopters, leverage Shipwire for their drop shipping needs. Since then, I've had multiple roles, including sales executive and now manager of strategic partnerships for our e-commerce and tech group. Today, commercial foot traffic is down, commercial retail is down, commercial real estate is predicted to hit one of its biggest slump in recent years. And these are all signs of a slowing economy. But the truth is, digital traffic, digital foot traffic, if you will, is up by a significant amount. In fact, the US Commerce Department and Bank of America put out a joint research project that showed that e-commerce penetration as a part of overall commerce has spiked in a majorly aggressive way. In 2009, e-commerce penetration, that means e-commerce sales as a part of total retail sales in the United States, was only about 5%. In 2019, that same e-commerce sales as a part of total retail sales spiked 11% to about 16%. In the last 8 weeks, they measured growth and saw that e-commerce sales over the last 8 weeks as a part of retail sales jumped to 27%. So we did 11% in 8 weeks and 11% over the last 10 years. That's how powerful recent times have been. And simultaneously, retail in-store sales have dropped to their lowest in almost a decade. That's crazy. So let's before we get ahead of ourselves, let's move on to the next slide. Let's understand everything by setting the stage and looking back to the early days, the 2014s, 2015s. This is when us at Shipwire and other 3PLs and other order management platforms in the industry saw some of the biggest consumer packaged goods companies, the big guys, doing hundreds of millions and billions. They were hearing from their buyers at retailers like Walmart, like Macy's, some of the even bigger retailers, that the retailers are going to be phasing down the amount of inventory purchased through bulk purchase orders. And obviously, this was for many reasons, capital efficiencies, et cetera. But basically, the distribution centers for these retailers are going to be taking on less goods by SKU of these major CPGs. And instead, they would be switching to what's called a drop ship model. But here's the problem, and here's why we were hearing from these CPGs. They had a unique challenge where back in that time, they were not as prepared to go direct to consumer, at least not in that way. And they had a bunch of specific problems. One was that they operated legacy systems that could not help them differentiate between pallets versus eaches or individual units. They also downstream couldn't really process and pick and pack in a warehouse facility made to support in-store retail. So they had very specific problems in 2015, but they also had a long amount of time. These retailers gave them 18 to 24 months leeway to get their act in order to switch to dropship. So fast forward to today, over the last few months, you see e-commerce growth has tremendously accelerated and has presented those same opportunities for brands to take advantage of. But when we, transfix today versus a couple years ago, some brands who were not ready for this transition recently have been caught flat-footed and they didn't have as much time to prepare. So if we move on to the next slide, we can talk about some of the gaps that traditional go-to-market, traditional retail has, right? So by traditional retail, I mean businesses, especially in this use case, that largely depend on purchase orders to drive revenue. We've seen firsthand how this has declined in the last couple of weeks, for obvious reasons, and beyond the obvious intricacies of seasonality and COVID by any category. The fact remains that if you're relying on too heavily anyway, on any one single distribution channel to reach customers, your brand has inherent risk, right? And over time, I think one of the things that we've seen at Shipwire, what I've seen personally is I think we've seen enough customers to bucket them into three nice little buckets where we can kind of go in and understand where the gaps are. So let's start with the first one. There are DNBs or DNVBs, digitally native brands, digitally native vertical brands that have gone to market primarily with owned e-commerce channels. So focusing on their own e-commerce channel as a touch point to bring in customers, a customer acquisition channel. For these particular operators, brand equity is obviously important to them. Owning that customer experience is totally important to them. And customizing the customer experience is definitely important to them. And for these particular reasons, they may be hesitant to map out to other sales channels, especially if they don't correspond to the same type of customer experience that the brand does. And for other reasons, like Amazon, we've seen recently, but we've known this for a little while, rumors of Amazon collecting transactional data, whether on purpose or by accident, to create new brands. And brand operators, especially those who really, really care about the customer experience and care about the differentiation that they have in the marketplace, tend to stray away from putting their product on multiple marketplaces to prevent things like price erosion and brand thieving. So let's talk about these national brands. National brands are defined, in my opinion, and in others' opinions as well, as brands that have massive distribution networks. These are brands that are traditionally doing, millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars, and they rely on capital efficiencies and infrastructure investments to drive that revenue, right? Because the large majority of that revenue is coming from retail buyers, category managers, cutting checks and driving POs, right? So these teams generally don't have resources or even in-house experience to be able to support an agile deployment of a direct-to-consumer infrastructure, let alone a direct-to-consumer infrastructure that participates on many channels, right? So that's another group. Let's talk about this third group, which is kind of a mixture of all types of companies. Basically, if your brand, whether it be digitally native, whether you're a national brand or you're an entrepreneur that's doing a ton of money on Amazon, if you're using Amazon as your single direct-to-consumer channel, you have a type of idiosyncratic risk that's inherent in your strategy, right? And that's been exposed a bit in recent times, given that if you rely on FBA, for example, SLAs have gone down. If on the front end of Amazon for customer acquisition on Prime, SLAs have gone down as well. So those are things to be mindful on. But if we move on to slide 8, one of the things that we'll find is we're going to answer the question, why is it important to diversify sales channels? And the answer, from a macro level, it seems obvious, right? You can acquire more customers. You have more ways to go to market. And frankly, in 2020, the more touch points you have in a world where a consumer is bombarded with advertisement and product placement. So the more touch points you have with your particular customer, the more opportunities you have to tell your story, your brand story. So why not take advantage of that? Why not take advantage of retailers and marketplaces who have put into place business development engines, customer acquisition engines for you to take advantage of? So let's go and talk about specific use cases and answer this particular question. So when it comes to branded e-com, it kind of goes without saying, but branded e-com is a primary touch point and a primary opportunity to set the tone for the customer experience. Digitally native brands like Bulletproof, for example, or Glossier and others have capitalized on this owned e-com channel, and they've leveraged it to be the one that sets the tone across other channels, right? This is important to us because if you are a national brand, for example, and you're thinking about how do we do our own channel, it's important not to neglect it because the customer experience, the tone is set from the brand, not the retail and not the marketplace, right? So it's important to note that. But we've seen use cases also on the flip where brands have solely leveraged the branded owned channel as a customer acquisition strategy, and they've been crushed sort of by the weight of their own success. And not to get into specifics, but you can look at recent news like brandlist.com, for example, and others who I mean, it's interesting. Web Smith of 2PML said this on Twitter the other day, and it's really timely. E-com, when it comes to customer acquisition, looks a lot like publishing, right? Like 5 years ago, because the cost of customer acquisition for own channel, if you consider Facebook ads and Google ads, continues to climb. So frankly, the only way, if you're adding the cost of customer acquisition into your unit economics, the only way publishers kind of overcame that rising cost was to diversify content channels. And we're trying to do the same in e-com now. If you are a brand and you're looking at your numbers, you know that over time, the more mix you have of sales channels, ideally, the more your customer acquisition costs go down because you don't have to rely on pay per click. But let's move on. Let's talk about marketplaces a little bit. Let's define it. Marketplaces are um, places online that are managed by third parties where you come as a brand to participate as a third party. You're not selling to the marketplace, you're selling to the end customer on behalf of the retail marketplace. Why take advantage of this? And we kind of led into it before because of the customer acquisition cost advantages, but there are also incentives that many brands have neglected over the past couple of years. And places like Target, which recently launched their Target Plus offering, have been experiencing massive growth. And not just because of this recent COVID-19 epidemic that has caused digital foot traffic to surge, but because of strategic investments that these particular people have put into place, you can now take advantage of marketplaces as a third-party seller to basically increase your customer acquisition, and depending on your strategy, increase some of the margin that you have. So when I say retail.com, I know you see retail.com on this slide here. It's important to denote what that is. Retail.com, and let's use Target as an example. Target has the Target Plus marketplace where you go and you sell as a third party. But Target.com also exists as its own entity where Target is the purchasing entity selling to the customer. And you have a flash transfer of inventory that happens between Target, you as a brand, and the end customer. Why is this important? Because there are different buying programs, incentive programs that buyers and category managers have in place that they're ramping up right now, frankly, for their .com. And I think it's really important for brands to take a look at an omni-channel strategy and understand where retail.com versus marketplace fits. And in saying so and doing so, retail.com, we can kind of break up into a single playbook that has two distinct plays. And one is a drop ship to the end customer. And the second is sending inventory into a distribution center. And both have implications upstream. If you think about it from the customer's perspective, upstream for the brand operators, because you need to have, no matter how you mix your D2C and retail.com channels, there has to be a playbook of systems in place to be able to switch back and forth between sending a single order to an end customer versus sending a pallet of goods to a distribution center. And I guess a good example of this is if you are a popular brand and you sell on 5 of the top 50 IR 100 retailers, and during the months of non-peak, they allow you to drop ship. They send you a ton of orders, you're drop shipping all day, you have inventory all over the place. But when it comes to peak season, they might they might purchase a lot of your fast moving SKUs and bring it into their distribution centers, since they don't want to pay, insane amounts for shipping a bunch of orders to the same customer. These types of scenarios exist. The other scenario would be if you're selling 1P to Amazon versus doing SFP or FBM as an Amazon seller. This would be a reason for you to have a system stack in place as well as an operation stack in place that allows you to play both sides of the field. When we talk about putting together an optimal e-commerce stack for omni-channel distribution, we're talking about having a series of technologies, playbooks, and infrastructure in place that allows you to serve your customer no matter what. So let's break down some of the very, very rudimentary pieces of an omni-channel stack. There's the front-end demand channel. This is where customers place their orders. This is where your product information is very visible and merchandised and curated in a visual way. And in between, there are tools. If you're a national brand, for example, who hasn't gone direct to consumer or are looking to place product on marketplaces, whether you're outsourcing it or doing it in-house, you're obviously going to be looking for product information management systems or PIMS, product listing systems, and others to get your product information onto that marketplace, onto that retail.com. Other tools that you would use, obviously, is to bring that order into your systems as an operator, and that would be distributed order management, for example. And there can be, under these different buckets of technology, a lot of different tools and vendors that you can mix and match in order to achieve the custom business logic that you require for your customer experience. I think it's really important to talk about inventory management, because when we talk about omni-channel retailing, and we could talk about this all day, but you can mix and match here to achieve custom business processes. The caveat here is, with inventory management in an omni-channel setting, no matter how your inventory is distributed, let's say around the country or around the globe, you need to have one single view of inventory in order to power data in all these systems that are feeding inventory to all these different channels. So that's a caveat that you need to have, is a conceptualized single view of inventory. Fulfillment, we could have a series of webinars about fulfillment on its own. But the point that we're trying to make here specifically is, if you're omni-channel retailing, fulfillment is obviously key, and not just from a technology standpoint. Does your fulfillment company have the technology to satisfy these omni-channel needs? Is your fulfillment company, frankly, financially stable enough to handle omni-channel needs? You have to take a look at, even if you're not using a fulfillment company, or you're doing it in-house, or you're using a series of fulfillment companies, are you distributed in enough customer cluster regions to support omni-channel retailing? These are questions your operations teams need to be asking on a regular basis and optimizing ongoing. And finally, a returns tool. Returns, I don't think, and this is a personal opinion, I think we are just getting to a point in e-commerce where we are saying, hey, we should figure out returns for omni-channel. It is still a big question mark for many, many brands, especially the more channels you have. So that actually brings us to our next slide, which is managing a multi-nodal fulfillment network. And that's what I like to call fault-tolerant fulfillment design. And the reason we call it fault-tolerant is, I borrowed a term from IT architecture for the same reasons, right? Obviously, first of all, if you're retailing in omni-channel and you have 10 channels calling on you for inventory and sending you orders, one of the things that you're going to want to do is adhere to these channels' SLAs. One of the ways to do that is to ship within ship windows. One of the ways to ship within ship windows and increase delivery times is to place and stage inventory closer to customer clusters, which inherently relies on the fact that you need to have multiple facilities close to customer clusters in order to fulfill on time. That, or you're shipping express on a regular basis, your choice. But essentially, having a fault-tolerant network design enables you in times of crisis to switch inventory from one place to another, depending on which facility goes down or which one runs out of inventory, et cetera, et cetera. So these are kind of like the basics of when we talk about diversifying demand. What we mean is, let's get on more sales channels and let's design a playbook to support these sales channels, as it is different than sending POs or fulfilling POs.